My name is Catherine Donaldson, and I'm a member at large on the ACRL Oregon board. On behalf of ACRL Oregon, I'd like to thank you for attending today's webinar discussion, Critical Conversations in Collection Development. This is our third pilot webinar, and it's going to be a little bit different since it's going to be a facilitated discussion rather than a presentation. And we'll hear a little bit more about how the logistics of that are going to go. But this webinar is being recorded, and you'll get an email later with a link to the recording as well as an evaluation survey. And we'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to fill that out so we can get a better idea of what's working well and what we could improve about these webinars in the future. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenter and facilitator today, Damon Campbell. He's the acquisitions librarian at the University of Oregon in Eugene. And as I said, this is kind of a new style of webinar we're trying out, so we're very appreciative of Damon being willing to lead this discussion. So I'll turn things over to you now, Damon.
Okay, I am unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Everyone, as Catherine said, I'm Damon Campbell. I'm the acquisitions librarian here, and I'm here today to work with all of you to have a really meaningful discussion about critical conversations in collection development and generally just the things that go into that. Before we get started, I would like to share with you a very brief PowerPoint. Can you all see that? I hope you can. And at some point, the slideshow thing will begin. There we are. So we are at Critical Conversations in Collection Development. And before we get started, I wanted to go over a couple of kind of ground rules things. As Catherine mentioned, we will be recording this webinar. And as she mentioned, this is sort of a new format. I'm sure a lot of folks in the, not in the room exactly, a lot of folks here have been to conferences and have gone to conversations that, that had breakout groups and had facilitated areas of discussion and times to kind of speak with their colleagues and come back to the group and share everything that was discussed. And unfortunately, with this format, we are going to encounter some challenges that are going to make this a little bit different than probably what you've become accustomed to at conferences. So consider this an experiment. Consider yourselves part of the experiment. I thank you all for joining us. I thank you for being part of the experiment. And during this conversation, we will be monitoring chat, and we ask that you find the participants tab and locate the controls that are in there. There are going to be some buttons that will be helpful for you, such as raising your hand, which will alert us to something that you need to share, and then we'll call on you. You can share your thoughts with the group. There's also notifications for whether or not you need someone to speed up this conversation or slow it down. I tend to speak quickly, so I totally don't mind if you need to do that. Just let me know. So I've got some goals in place for today. Number one is an exchange of ideas. The way I see it, no one knows everything, but everyone knows something. And there's a particular context to what I know about collection development, which I assume is basically the same kind of thing as all of you. Everyone has their own experiences. No one knows everything. But if you get everyone together, you can generally come up with a pretty cohesive idea of what's going on the landscape. The second goal is to compare experiences. I've got my experiences. I have my expertise based on the organizational arrangement of my institution that I'll go into in a little bit. I'm sure everyone here does as well. So getting a sense of what everyone else is experiencing and how that kind of correlates with what you're doing at your institution, I at least find that helpful. The third is identifying themes. There are going to be a lot of things that come up with regard to collection development that I think all of us have experienced, budget being a primary factor. So the themes that go into our collection development decisions and policies will be something of a goal of mine, just getting a sense of what everyone's themes are and things that we are commonly experiencing. So challenges. As I mentioned, and as you probably realized by now, we're on the internet. We're not in the same physical space. And because of that, the format can kind of lead to some challenges. The first one, I think, is that there's going to be a lack of a certain amount of nonverbal communication. In person, you get a sense of nuance and you get a sense of what people are doing and saying and where they're coming from, and you lose a little bit of that in a web format. Numbers exacerbate that issue, and we've got more than 20 folks in the room right now. Having a facilitated conversation among that many people can be challenging in person. On the web, we think it's going to be challenging, but I think it's going to be successful. I hope that it is. We will see. The third thing is software limitations. One of the main things is the muting. We ask that everyone remain muted unless you're actually going to speak, because background noise is the worst thing in the world when it comes to these kind of sessions. The software also doesn't allow for people to break out into small groups and then come back. I believe there are different iterations of Zoom that do have that function, but this one does not. So please keep that in mind as one of the things. And as you share feedback with us as far as how this kind of format can be refined, please do keep these things in mind as suggestions for how to improve things going forward. So at the University of Oregon, we do collection development by committee. And it started out kind of as an experiment similar to this. Our collection development librarian left in 2007, and up until that point, she had been the living, breathing, walking, talking embodiment of our collection development policy. She handled the budget, she checked with our selectors and our faculty to make sure that things were being cut that needed to be cut. She did a lot, and when she left in 2007, we talked about, well, I say that like I was here because I got here in 2013, but it was discussed that there needed to be a reorganization to begin with. And they thought, rather than have all of that work go on one person, and it's a lot, why not create more work, which sounds bad, but there's a lot more to be done than just balancing the budget and talking to faculty. There's usage statistics, there's electronic resource audits and all kinds of things. And that sort of work requires multiple positions. So we thought about it and we said, well, why don't we bring all of the people that would have a stake in this kind of work to the table and form a collection managers group? We did that for a few different reasons. One, distribution of labor. Expecting one person to do all of that is challenging at best. We're a big institution, we get a lot of stuff, and it's difficult for one person to manage. If we have a group of people who all have different responsibilities and respond to different stakeholders, you get a better arrangement and a better breadth and wealth of ideas at the table at the same time. Another reason why is that our subject specialists have insider knowledge of what the faculty need and want. So we can actually make really informed decisions about our collection development policies because the selectors are in the room with us versus one person having to go and talk to one person and another person one-on-one. We can have a really nice conversation among ourselves. The third thing is that the model that we have now allows people to rotate on and off. They're 2-year appointments. And when someone is done, they're done. And then someone else can come on. And while collection development is a part of subject specialists' responsibilities in a lot of cases, this level of collection development experience is something that not every institution offers. So we thought it would be a really nice way to build in an additional level of experience for our selectors. Now, there are also some challenges to this. And one of the big ones is, as the case with anything that's done by committee, decisions may take a while to come to. You have a lot of people in the room who have a lot of constituents and stakeholders to speak with. They have to go back, talk to them, come back to the table with new ideas. And because of the experts at the table, oftentimes when we pitch an idea, it's less about shooting it down and more about making it as airtight as possible. So in the course of refining an idea to get it where we want it, it could take a long time. The second is the occasional deadlock. It's happened once in the 5 years I've been here, but sometimes two sides of the table just do not agree on a policy or a particular move. In that case, the associate dean who actually heads our committee makes that final call. And at work, obviously, not everyone gets their way all the time, but it can be difficult and a little bit frustrating when you're working with your colleagues and you just can't come to consensus, especially when you've had really good track record as far as working with them in the past. It's not a personal thing with them. It's just, it's hard when you can't reach your goal of getting to the same page with your people. So with all of that being said, that is the context of the experience that I bring to the table. I think a lot more people in the room, I'm going to just say room, a lot more people in here probably have a more traditional model that we used to have where you have one person doing collection development. Now for this conversation, because of the lack of breakaway rooms and whatnot, I thought about it and thought, why not have a Google document available for the folks that are participating? One, to track on the ideas that we come up with during this conversation, so that way we can come away with something that everyone added to kind of a crowdsourced notes sort of a format. Second, to help us keep track of what we're actually talking about. And third, because I feel like these are the things that came up most often for me in my experience. And so it was easy for me to populate certain fields with that data. Because I'm looking at the share thing now, I can't rightly see it, but I'm hoping that Catherine has shared that link with everyone, and it looks like she just has. So I'm going to unshare for a moment and bring up that document, and then we can get started with the conversation. Okay. Can you all see critical conversations in collection development? And oh, I see people are in there. Wonderful. So again, this is a totally collaborative document. If you have any ideas you want to put in there, please feel free. If you have other highlights, such as themes, drivers, any other large group areas you want to create, please feel free. But I wanted to get started with some of the questions that I asked folks to consider. So The first one was, do you feel you received adequate training or information on collection development in library school? I graduated in 2007, and there was one class that mentioned it maybe a couple of times. It was a reference class, but literally all of my experience in CD has been through actually doing work. So I wonder what other experiences people had as far as their readiness for collection development responsibilities when they got into their positions. Does anyone have anything to share? Ooh, I see a raised hand, Melinda. And
sorry, got to unmute. Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
okay.
So I am currently a just regular librarian at Spokane Community College, and but I come from a background of K-12 in Texas, and I got my library degree in 2012. I did have quite a bit of training because in Texas they have very rigorous standards as to what constitutes an excellent library. They have a rubric basically that you have to adhere to at the K-12 environment, and in terms of standards and being what the school is judged on. So they were very rigorous about what they tell you to look for when you're selecting how, that was part of a big part of our training. My experience coming up to the college library has been, I was almost shocked because there really is kind of, you just kind of buy, and there really hasn't been a lot of organization. There's no real way of measurement. I'm used to actually having to go in and analyze absolutely everything and make strategic decisions based on collection. I guess we're a team, I guess. We've created a collection team similar to what you've done this last 2 years. We are a merged library, so we have 2 campuses. And I guess some of the challenges that we're facing are, as a merged library for 2 college campuses, we're having issues in terms of budget distribution, which we don't even know where the budget is or what the budget is. So we're not even told, okay, you have $3,000 in the humanities to spend. We don't even have that information to start with. And so I'm curious as to how other colleges are doing this, because it's very different from my previous experience. So I'm excited to hear what other people have to say.
Okay. I can definitely speak to that. I do want to leave space for other people because I'm sort of facilitating. I don't want to take up all the breathing space here. So does anyone want to jump in response to Melinda? I am not seeing any raised hands. So I'll start. If somebody wants to jump in, feel free. At the university, we are also experiencing some budget challenges. For the last several years, we've had to make certain cuts to our stuff, specifically with regard to continuing resources and serials. We find that our budget dollars don't come in as frequently as we would like for purposes of inflation. So pretty much every year we have to make some difficult decisions. Those funds come from central administration, and central administration has a finite amount of funds to share with everyone on campus, including the library. At this point, we are aware that we will need to make cuts, but just like you all—
Hi, Damon. I'm sorry to interrupt, but a couple of people are having trouble hearing you, so I don't know if you could speak a little louder, or I don't know where your microphone is.
Oh, it is. Well, it's built into the webcam. I'm going to try to lean closer. I'm going to move it closer. Here we go.
Thank you.
Hear me now? No. Okay. How about now? Wow. Okay. Maybe if I move back some. Is that better? Okay, that's really odd. I haven't moved much of anything. And I don't know how to manage the microphone setting to turn up the volume. I am sorry about that. Okay, how about now? Well, I don't want to spend a whole lot of group time working on my microphone. Would anyone like to jump in and engage Melinda Martin's point while I fiddle with my microphone stuff? Or can anyone hear me at all?
Hey, Damon, we can hear you a little bit.
Okay, I'm not sure how to sort that out. Technical difficulties. This is one of those things with experiments. So I'm going to try to just speak louder and hope that that goes off. But as I was trying to convey a little bit earlier, we get our funds from central administration, and oftentimes we don't necessarily know what the extent of our cuts are going to be until pretty close to having to make some decisions. As of right now, we know that we need to make cuts, but we don't know how much those cuts are going to be. We've modeled some scenarios at the suggestion of central administration, but we're still waiting on word as well. So I don't think that Melinda's situation is at all uncommon, or at least it's not been in my experience. Oh, and I see that people are already adding to the questions to consider. That's wonderful. Thank you all. So I wanted to ask a little bit, because budget came up, and that's definitely one of the things I think is a theme as well as a driver in terms of collection development. As I've mentioned, budgets tend to drive what we do. We can only buy what we can afford for the most part. And as resources continue to get more expensive and our funds continue to stay where they are, every year we're having to make tough decisions, at least at the University of Oregon. Budget's a critical factor, and especially in the case nowadays, it's really difficult to get those funds. We're seeing a lot of landscape changes as far as Elsevier and Taylor and Francis has had some public blowback from libraries as well. And so I'm curious about what you all's experiences with the budget have been. Here, it's not been too great. Obviously, you can still buy stuff, but we're having to make some tough choices and having some challenging times. Can anyone else speak to their budget situation or what their experiences have been?
Hello, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, my name is Greg Bem. I'm at Washington on my we've had the same.
Greg, if you could speak a little bit quiet, a little bit louder. I actually can't hear anything right now. It's not just me.
Test.
There we go.
You can hear now.
Yes.
Weird. This is a weird day. Anyway, so we've had the same collection development budget for approximately 10 years. And as everybody else is aware, I'm sure the database costs keep going up, as well as system costs, things like easy proxy being a requirement, that sort of thing. And so we're really struggling, but we have become slightly more skilled with grants and looking for additional ways to find budget or to find resources that can support specific collection projects.
There we go. Thank you for that. In the chat, Melinda mentioned that due to a change in software and the adoption of CTC Link, all of our college has not had accurate access to budget information. I would like to hear a lot more about that. I'm not familiar with CTC Link, and I cannot imagine a situation where I could operate without access to budget information. So I would just like to know how you're managing that at all, because that's incredible.
Okay, so I'm not sure that I would say we're managing it. We're going based on historical data at this point, and just kind of going based on, we know what we have spent in the past, and we know what money we generally have access to. 3 years ago, the community colleges of Spokane, SBCTC for Washington, got together and basically said, we're moving to this program, CTC Link, and it was supposed to consolidate all of this various information. Unfortunately, it didn't roll out the way it was supposed to, and so we've been 3 years that they have not closed the books. They just closed the books for 2015. I think they're just now, we've been audited, and it's like we've been spending money appropriately, apparently, not just for us, but I'm talking about the whole college. But the software was not pulling the information correctly or what it was supposed to do. And so, yeah, that's been a challenge from an administrative standpoint. So they don't have accurate numbers to give us. So that's kind of what we're dealing with right now. However, even within that, if we're making, I think that one of the challenges that we're facing is that even without a direct collection person. We have 8 librarians between 2 colleges, and that's it. We don't have a cataloger at this time. We have 2 tech services or circulation staff, 2 full-time and 2 half-time circulation staff members, and that's it. We don't have a tech services department. We don't have any of that. And so trying to manage the collection and make goals and create that, we're really just kind of trying to keep our head above water. Coming from, as I said, coming from my background of we had to make really, we had to prove all of our data, we had to make data-driven decisions. Everything in Texas was data-driven decisions. And so I'm really used to being able to clearly say, this is my goal for the year, this is what I want to buy. But I also was very much given, this is how much money you have to spend to make those decisions. And we're not, we don't have that at this point. And even within the guests, our internal management has not been such that we have a process for those decision making, and this is how much money you're spending in different areas. So we're in the process of building that at this time.
Okay. Do you have an idea of when that might be completed and how things will change for you? I guess on the short end of time, once those changes have been implemented?
I'm sorry, repeat the last part.
Do you have a sense of how your workflows and your work life really will change as a result of those changes in the short term?
I think right now we're still kind of flying by the seat of our pants. There's just been a lot of change. We're really hopeful. We created a collection team. So 3 of us are working together to revise the collection development policy, talking about things like streaming videos. How are we didn't even have an element of within the collection development policy about streaming versus DVDs, how are we dealing with videos? So we're in the process of revising that. We're working on trying to get clarity about the budget and how we're making those decisions. And I'm actually pulling on my background knowledge at the K-12 environment to try and emulate similar processes. It's not the same beast, so to speak. You can't have, every college is different. So you can't have, here's the state standard for our college, But at the same time, I think that there are elements of that data decision making that I can say, okay, what are our goals and how does this play into the larger college? So right now we're in the process of making those plans, but we're also doing a program review, and that's going to be part of it, so that we can create a strategic plan to kind of how are we going to assess each part of the collection, how are we going to make these decisions so that it becomes more of a process as opposed to this overarching, okay, we have this policy, but there's no real process as to how the procedure as to how we're making these decisions. Does that answer your question? I don't know.
No, that absolutely does. Thank you. I wanted to go back to something you mentioned earlier on. Am I correct in recalling that your budget allocations haven't really changed a whole lot in the last 10 years?
No, I wouldn't say that. We are asked to cut every year, but really the decisions right now are, we get the bill comes in. Our head circulation manager actually runs the budget, so they have all of the budgetary information. They make all of the orders, but we don't have access necessarily to any of that. We don't know where we are in the budget. We don't know how much we've spent. It's just, okay, if we get an order, hey, this teacher wants this, we're going to get it. And so we put the order in, but there's just no real planning. And so when a database comes up for renewal, it's at that time, I pull all the data, we look at it, but it's not really within the context of a larger environment. We don't know how much we've lost or not lost or anything over the last 3 years. So we're just not sure.
So in terms of the budget, and this is one thing that's kind of come up at my institution, and I'm curious about you all's experiences as well. I've been here since 2013, and there have been some changes to our allocations, but on the whole, they've not actually been changed not significantly changed in about more than 20 years. Of course, the programs that these allocations fund have changed in that time. But when it comes to making decisions about the budget, there's data and those decisions and factors to consider. But there's also politics, and there's also getting buy-in. And we have found that it's really tough to get faculty members to really be okay with taking their money away. You can't see the air quotes, here we go. Taking their money away. Even if the amount of people enrolled in that program has gone down, even if there's not a whole lot being published, people have a certain amount of, or feel a certain amount of ownership over the funds they administrate, over the area that they work in. And so I'm curious what other experiences people have had as far as finding a balance between politics and decision-driven or data-driven decision-making. So I'm going to leave that open for anyone to respond to, anyone and everyone. Okay, so it seems like everyone, when they need to cut an allocation, it seems like everyone else's faculty is really cool with that. So I might need to get with you all and figure out how you're getting that buy-in, because that is not the case here. Another thing I kind of wanted to ask about in terms of buy-in generally and faculty participation, because that's been one of our challenges as well. As I mentioned a little while ago, we've had several collection reduction projects where we got rid of certain resources that either were underperforming, the usage wasn't there, the price gone up way too much, etc. And because of the timing of our cuts, oftentimes we have to make these decisions during the summer so that we can be prepared for our renewal season, because renewals are due on September 1st. And so in some situations, our faculty don't really get the amount of input that they would like. In other times, they're just really engaged. And so I wanted to know how people's experiences with faculty as far as getting their assistance with budgetary changes and collection development has gone. Like, how engaged and involved are your faculty in this process?
I'm happy to chime in. I don't want to dominate the conversation, but I can certainly speak to the fact that when we trial a new database, often we do have a form that comes back, and same with our teaching or any collection. You get kind of the same voices each time. You have your rapport with your liaison areas, but trying to gather the feedback from, say, places that you don't always interact with on if I'm working with automotive or something like that. Their feedback is harder to get because they're not necessarily regular library users. And so wanting to make sure that you're supporting the students, I think it's definitely a challenge at our library.
Thank you. Can I ask, does that situation change at all when you're talking about introducing a new program or bolstering support of an existing one?
So when we are, certainly if they're looking at something that they want, they're going to have a lot more buy-in. We have a very robust nursing program, for example, in the nursing department. We want this, we want visible body, or we want this particular database, and they'll push for it and help us figure out the way to make it happen. Certainly, if we can find ways to engage whatever department that is. But I think it really comes back to building those relationships and being excited about what they do, and being that interaction and building of relationships is so important, because otherwise you're just not going to get the feedback.
Wonderful. Thank you. Greg has chimed in on chat. Faculty not engaged. We satisfy most low-cost requests from faculty that we distribute without faculty input. Reserves is another side of the coin. I want to hear about this side of the coin, please.
Hey, can you hear me? Yes? Okay, I'll just assume so. Thanks, Melinda. Yeah, we don't have any money for reserves, and we've tried so hard to find systemic ways to respond to the issue of reserves, but most of the time faculty have to provide us with reserves in some way, shape, or form. So it's a strange relationship where they end up doing a lot of the seedy work for us, simply because they have connections to the publishers that we don't, and their program areas and their program budgets have money that we do not have as a library to support reserves. So our reserves are dependent almost entirely on the work of other people that are not in the library.
Thank you, Greg. So you mentioned that you have faculty who sometimes interact with the vendors that can nail down good pricing. We do have that as well. At the University of Oregon, we're a state institution, and we actually, it's a law that the only folks who are allowed to, commit university funds are in acquisitions. we have actually had situations in the past where selectors, maybe without realizing it, actually committed funds on our behalf. So they made a purchase, they asked for an invoice or something like that. How do you manage the split between a selector getting information and corresponding with the vendor, but make sure that they are not actually placing orders on behalf of your institutions? Or is that even a problem where you are? And I ask that to Greg and to everyone.
Well, for us, yeah, all purchases need approval from different positions of leadership. So there is definitely no way in our organization that a faculty member or even a dean could pay for something using the library budget. It's explicitly controlled by the vice president of instruction at my school, and then my dean, and then the librarians also have authority to make certain purchases. So we've never had that issue, but I'd be curious to see if anybody else has had that issue.
Anyone else want to chime in? Okay, it seems like, oh, Andrea's contributed most of the time. Selectors at Eastern Washington vendors. Andrea, I would like to ask how you manage the need for new resources without the funds to acquire them. In our case, we end up canceling something to make room for something new. How does that work where you are? And where are you?
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. I'm at Eastern Washington University, also in Spokane. And we really just haven't added a lot of new resources. This year was the first year we could do it, and we had been keeping kind of a wish list of items the last year and a half, and basically went through the wish list and got things that way. And so I was going out and getting quotes, or we were just ordering things through EBSCO for single title subscriptions, things like that. But mostly we're not changing our subscription base that much.
If I may ask, is there a mechanism in place where you are where faculty can use department funds to finance certain resources as opposed to coming through the library?
We've only had two situations in the last, or maybe one situation in the last 2 years where a department had funds to use. It did work pretty well, but I don't know if maybe our departments don't have funds or aren't even thinking about using them to buy library resources. I think for us, it really is the issue of subscriptions being ongoing resources, and we just don't have enough ongoing money for things like that.
Understood. At the university, we have our budget, well, not budget, we have our funds set up to where we have lines for discretionary funds. That's money that can be used on one-time purchases or moved into other areas. We have standing order funds, we have continuing resource funds, we have approval funds. And so in a lot of cases, we encourage our faculty, if they want our selectors, if they want a resource that's continuing that they can't necessarily afford, we allow them to move money from their discretionary funds, monographs, over to the continuing resource funds to sustain that purchase. Is there any kind of a mechanism similar to that people are using?
We don't assign funds to departments anymore. That ended 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, right before I came. So when we're making decisions to cancel things, we're making it from the library. We do try to share it with faculty when possible, or at least with the academic deans of the impacted unit. But what I've found in the few cuts we've made to subscriptions, people aren't noticing, or if they are, they're not complaining. And then we had a number of print standing orders that we just did a project to cancel. And I think because they were print standing orders, people weren't using them anyway, so nobody's noticed that those are gone. And so that was the way we were able to add new subscriptions this year. A limited number is through those print standing order cancellations. And that was a librarian-driven discussion and process. So the individual subject librarians were the ones that signed off on that.
Awesome. Thank you. Melinda has added a question to chat. You can institute annual reading or purchasing plans for monographs and physical books. Is your budget allocated or planned by percentages or some other? The last question is specific to a So we do have, it's less annual and more cyclical. We seem to always have some sort of a weeding project going on, and it seemed to be the case since I've arrived here. I think they just are ongoing long-term things, and once we get rid of a certain set of our collection, we start looking at other areas that we either wanted to weed or knew we needed to weed before, just didn't have time for. So it seems like it's always happening here. And in a lot of cases, when we're weeding things, we end up sending them to Better World books. I don't know if folks have heard of that service. We find them really delightful to work with. Is our budget allocated defined by percentages or some other metric? So at this point, because the allocations have been fairly steady since nearly when I was born, it's hard for me to tell how they started out. When I look at it, I see certain dollar amounts, and I don't think it's percentage as much as it was based on how much money I think those disciplines needed at the time. And minute adjustments have been made to that sense. And that tends to be the case with both electronic and print materials, although we are trying to trend more toward electronic versus print. Does anyone else want to jump in on this? Thank you, Andrea. Historical spending, that seems to be a thing. So has, with regard to historical spending, have you all tried to, I don't want to say modernize because it makes it seem like allocations are antiquated, which they may be. Have you all tried to correct the allocations or bring them in line with what the data would sustain nowadays, or have there been any motions toward that in your institutions?
So one of the things that one of the big projects that we're kind of, it's still in the planning process and we don't have a cataloger at the moment, but we're really trying to, again, to be more data driven because that's being asked of us, and also to try and be more transparent to our constituents, to all of the different departments. So at this time, the current whether it's LC or whether it's Dewey, trying to pull out what resources support directly what department. Don't necessarily, you can't just pull a report and say, hey, these are the resources that support you. How would we make those changes? And so one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to implement a plan where we tag our collection retroactively and then tag it moving forward based on our different institutional priorities and or programs. And our college goes through program review, so every program is evaluated, and so we're hoping to be able to try and work with programs through their program review, as well as helping create a plan for things like weeding and purchasing and focusing allocations in that regard. It's still in the planning process, but that's kind of where we're trying to head.
Uh-oh, I'm muted. Can you hear me now? Okay, so thank you. So at the university, we, for a while, and I believe it was something like 6 or 7 years, the collection management group worked on an allocation formula with the goal of trying to sort of right-size our allocations and bring them away from historical and more in line with the data that we have. As is the case with most libraries, I think we do try to make decisions based on data. Culturally, though, Oregon, and specifically the University of Oregon, is really different from anywhere I've been, in that people's feelings are paid attention to here. And in a lot of cases, our decision making on our budget has been stymied because certain folks just were not really feeling the changes that we wanted to make. So when I think about if I could change anything about how my organization handles collection development, my main thing would be the removal of politics and just go with the data. But that's me as a bean counter. I'm wondering what other people's thoughts are in this regard. Anyone? No one? I appreciate that.
I can say when I was at a high school I was one of the largest high schools in San Antonio, and feelings are so difficult to overcome because I was, as a librarian, even you see these amazing, I had first edition books of things, but because of state standards, age of the collection was a really huge issue. And so I had a 100-year-old library. It was the oldest school still in existence from beginning to end in San Antonio. And yeah, I had to reduce the collection. I had to add to the collection, but I upped the age by the average age by about 25 years. And that was over a 4-year period. But it was a lot of tough decisions, and I think here, even in my institution, we still have a very difficult time with even among the librarians making some of those tough decisions because we're attached to how we got these books or how it happened. So getting rid of it and emotion, even internally, not even talking about our external constituents. But yeah, it's a difficult thing to challenge.
It can be. And even beyond people's feelings about how the budget funds are administrated, we've run into situations here where we have a collection or we have a group of items that were given to us by a specific donor or some kind of an organizational, I guess, handshake deal that happened maybe years or even decades ago. And because of the commitment made by maybe 2 library administrations prior to us, we are still on the hook for staying with this agreement or maintaining this collection or keeping it on our grounds. And so politics come into effect at the University of Oregon just based on that kind of thing as well. So it's not all about people's feelings about the budget. Sometimes someone made a deal 20 years ago and that deal still stands. Can anyone speak to that? Fair. Not everyone's been around for long enough. Dan makes an interesting point. If people have confidence in the data being accurate and meaningful, that will be easier. But the data is often terrible and sometimes misused. So that has definitely been the case. And unfortunately, I can't speak to it because I'm not really someone who works with the data to that extent or the usage data. We have had situations where, say, the counter data didn't quite calculate things the way we thought it should or would. We've had different standards that kind of conflicted, and so we had to sort of make our own well-informed decisions based on different counts that we were getting. Again, can't really speak too in depth to that, but we have had that experience. All right, so I got a really interesting question just now that I'd like to share with the group. If there's time, let's see. I'm interested to know if anyone has recent experience with the university bringing a new academic program online and how to incorporate it with the existing collections budget. How would people approach such a situation? So I think that's a really, really excellent question. We've actually experienced that. And unfortunately, I can't tell you how to fix it, but I can tell you what I've experienced. So in the last few years, we've had cluster hires at the university, we've had programs started, and in a lot of cases, it feels to me like the program comes first and then the funds or the resources that the library needs to help maintain or sustain that program are sort of an afterthought. So in some cases, we've had to work out deals with the departments themselves where the faculty uses part of their money to purchase a resource that we then help moderate for them. In some cases, we've had to move funds away from places that weren't really using all of their funds effectively to kind of bolster those funds. Obviously, I think the ideal would be that the university give us money to sustain that discipline just like everyone else. But sometimes you get new programs that you don't get new money. So that's sort of been the case at the university. Anyone else?
I've certainly had that experience because in the community college system in Washington, higher ed is, or our state board is approving applied bachelor's degrees. And as we've brought some of those on board, I think as librarians, we need to lean on our deans a little bit to say, hey, you need to make some noise that we need funding to meet the needs of these new programs. So it, on one hand, it happens at the administrative level. And so we did get some funding for if you will, some of the more glamorous programs like our IT software applied bachelor's degree. However, for other degrees, what we did in-house is when we order physical books, we tag them with, we apply a tag so that it says, oh, this is a history book, or this is political science, and then at the end of the month we run a report that goes out to the different departments. And the tag that we added that relates to my response is we added a tag for, hey, this is a book that we're buying for applied bachelor's degrees, so that we're able to generate that and say, hey, administration, here's this huge list of materials that we've purchased that's essentially an unfunded mandate, as a way to say, you know, this is what we need and an increase for our budget.
Thank you, Margie. I think that's actually a really excellent idea. Does anyone else want to respond to that? All right. Oh, and there's been some activity in our chat. If collection items don't have usage, are they being advertised or promoted? That is a great question, and it's hard for me to speak to. In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. In some cases, there's been a demo, but then usage dropped off. And there's also sometimes the usage patterns are super weird, and so high use happens in December, and then no one uses it for months. So sometimes it's about a certain course using it that happens at a certain period of time in a year. And at that point, you have to decide, well, is this worth maintaining just for this specific use or not? And it comes down to how much it is per use, at least at the university. So I would like to ask about people's experiences with budgetary flexibility. In our case, that really comes down to packages. We have a lot of packages. A lot of times those are multi-year, and so we can't necessarily remove or add stuff to them. We can't cancel them unless we're in some kind of a dire financial strait. And so when we enter into a package, it's with the expectation that these funds are committed for a long period of time. As a result of that, we have tried our very best in the last few years to start trying to get away from just in case purchasing and go toward just in time. That means not collecting stuff just because it's on the approval profile or because it's part of this package, but because it's actually wanted and needed by our stakeholders. So getting out of certain packages and really trying to refine what we're collecting has given us a little bit more financial flexibility. All of a sudden, we have a little bit more money to move around as opposed to having to wait for 3 years until this license expires. Can anyone speak to their experiences in that regard?
So we don't have, our budget really comes from our student fees. We don't get state monies at this time. We don't get monies from different departments or anything like that. So in terms of flexibility, we have pretty much open flexibility to do with what we wish. But again, you're tied to things like your contracts with your vendors and so forth. So I would agree that puts kind of a strain on certain things, because for, when you're doing budget planning, when half of your budget is if you have a mid-year cycle and you're not aware of how all those cycles play in together, it kind of toys with the budget quite a bit.
I'm going to continue moving on. So I'd like to take a look with the 10 minutes we have left, really probably a little bit less, because I do want to leave room for people to just have sort of a free addition of any questions they had to the chat, whether privately or to everyone. But I'd like to take a look at another one of our questions, because it's the one that's received the fewest responses. So, or one of the fewest. So what factors limit CD decisions at your institution? For me, the biggest one in my experience is budget. Every time we want to get something, we've got to look at how much it costs and if we can afford it. And of course, that's the case. with everyone who has money and finite funds to use. But with us, because of the amount of multi-year licenses we have, because of the amount of buy-in we need, and a lot of other extenuating factors, it can be difficult to really make the full effective use of our budget because of so many competing interests on it. Would anyone else like to speak to that?
Is it too Pollyanna to say that the curriculum drives my collection development decisions? Because I am really thinking about, you know, how students would use this in their projects, how teachers would might use it in the classroom or in their curriculum. And beyond the curriculum, I'm also, because I'm in a community college, looking at what's going to help the student clientele. So one of the projects I did a couple years ago that's still running is we had an unused wall space, and so we put up and some shelving that we salvaged from another place in our library. We put up that shelving, and it's a collection that I call essential college skills. So we put, 500 problems in physics on there, and how to study for the SAT, how to, how to deal with stress management. So I have stress management for teenagers there, and The Now Habit by Neil Fiore, and things that students can find to help themselves. Lots of math problem sets and chemistry problem sets and all kinds of stuff. So there's that piece. And then over for my English language learners, in the section of books we have set aside for those English language learners, I have a student resource section, which essentially uses my playground to put in things like American accent training in the so the students in the upper levels who are also studying for the TOEFL books, which they'll find in student resources, are, they'll find things that they're like, hey, this is for me.
Thank you for that. I've got to ask, do you have anything on the transatlantic accent? I've always found it fascinating, and you mentioned the American accent.
I'm sorry, have I got anything on what?
The transatlantic accent.
I do not. So I don't. I only, and that's in part because I haven't looked for that. So there might be something out there, but I don't have it.
Okay, fair. It's something that I think is interesting. It's not necessarily collection development. It's just, oh, you mentioned languages. Okay. Oh, and Greg has chimed in. Time is a major factor that prohibits effective CD. Absolutely, and that's part of the successes and one of the reasons why I think we decided to go to a collection development by team approach. It's a lot of work for one person to do, and when you have so many different competing interests and so many people to talk to, it gets to a point where you can't efficiently do what needs to be done unless you have a few people working or doing that work. I've always wondered, this is the first place I've ever been that did it by committee, and there are others out there, I'm sure, but I've always wondered how the split is between a more traditional one-person CD model and how many folks do it by committee like we do at the university.
So I guess I have I don't know if an add-on or follow-up question to that. So here, again, as I said, our processes were not, we had one person that was on one campus doing collection development and they did it one way, and at the other campus it was another way, and when we merged, things kind of are kind of all over the place. And I'm curious as to kind of decision-making processes, having one, where you have that one person, but even as a team, are you guys creating the systems and then saying, hey, okay, to your liaison areas, hey, this is how much this area gets? Or are you guys actually making the lists of what you're going to purchase or making your purchasing plans as a group?
Well, for us, and actually Catherine, as one of the members of the group, may be able to speak to this a little bit better because she actually has selecting responsibilities where I don't. But we have a certain amount of money for every discipline. And then on our team of people, we have people who represent different subject areas. So we'll have someone from humanities, maybe someone from sciences, collection projects. And we have 2 new continuing resource edition seasons per year. At that point, people will submit lists of things that they want to have purchased. During the year, they can just submit selections for monographs and whatnot to us, and we will just make that happen until the funds run out. So that's how we handle it here. Anyone else want to chime in? All right. Well, folks, we have about 5 minutes left. I am seeing some wonderful contributions to our Critical Conversations document. I thank you all for that. With the last few minutes, I just want to open up the floor to anyone who wants to jump into the chat and drop a question they've been holding on to this entire time. If you have any ideas on things we could add to this sort of a format to improve it, I'm interested in hearing that. The feedback form will be sufficient, but any feedback you'd like to share at this point, we've got 4 or 5 minutes left. I would love to hear it. Again, thank you all for joining us. Thank you to Catherine for facilitating this. Thank you to the ACRL. This has been a treat for me. All right, well, then I do believe we are done. And please enjoy the extra 4 minutes of your lives.
Yeah, thank you so much, Damon, for facilitating this discussion. And to all the participants, thank you for coming. And do keep an eye on your email because we will be sending out a recording to this. We could also send out a link to the Google document and as well as the survey. And again, we'd really appreciate your feedback. So thank you and stay tuned for more news about future webinars. Have a nice day.
Thank you all.